Okay, so now let's talk about blocks. And some of these codes you will see on the below the video. So here I have a method, and I have whatever these things that are inside the curly bracket. These are called block. Okay. So the way that this works, and it could be a little bit confusing, you can rewatch this video over and over until it kind of makes sense, and it will make more sense as you use Ruby. But this is kind of something that's unique to Ruby, and it makes Ruby pretty powerful. It allows you to do things that maybe other languages cannot do this way, quite this way. So it could be, it could take a while to see how this works. So I created a method called test, and I'm starting a block. So I have this method. I'm going to call this method, and I'm going to pass this block. Okay, this block of code. And what it does is, if I implement this, let's show the results. It said it prints this, and then wherever it says yield, it basically takes this block, and then just imagine that you got this block and you paste it wherever it says yield. So when I call this method function, a method test, it puts this block, it calls this, and then wherever it says yield, just executes whatever is in that block. Okay, so we'll say you're in the method, and then we'll say you're in the block, you're again back to the method, and then it will say you're in the block, and then that's what it says. Alright, so I hope that wasn't too tricky. So now let's comment that out. Now in the block, in the method, we can pass a parameter to the block. So again, whatever is in the curly bracket is the block, right? So that is actually the that's the block. And in the method, I can pass a parameter to the block, and it gets accepted in the block as this I. Okay, and then the block, that's the block, but it passed a variable I into this block. So when I run this test, it will say you're in the block 5, you're in the method test, and it will say you're in the block 100, because this 100 got passed to this, and then when it executed the yield statement, which basically pastes the block, it said puts you're in the block, and then it displayed that value. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Let's make it a little bit more trickier. Now, two new concepts. I can pass a parameter, okay, from the block. Okay, let me just make this so that this looks a little bit easier. Okay, it looks just like the other blocks that we did. So here I'm passing a parameter to the method. Okay, that's not surprising, right? But also the block can return a value. So this yield can actually return a value. Okay, so a block can return a value, and that value is going to be stored in the yield. So this is how it works. I pass a number 5 to this variable called num, and it stores it. And then here I echo out, or I print out, the value of yield num. Okay, so when I call yield num 5 gets passed to this I, and then it executes 5 times. The num is 5, so it runs 5 times 5, so that returns 25, right? And the return value, this yield num, gets replaced by 25. Okay, makes sense? Okay, so first let's walk through that again. Okay, so square 5, so it passed that parameter 5 to a num, and then when I called yield num, it passes this num value to this I. So now I is 5, and then now it performs this 5 times 5, and that is 25, right? and that gets returned and replaces the value of yield num. Okay, I hope that makes sense. We can do another example. So we can say, for example, yield num, and we can have this. Okay, and we can say yield num times x. Y has a value of y. Okay, so when I do yield num, it's going to do yield 5. So it's going to run this again, and it's going to return 25. X was 25 too, so it's going to be 25 times 25, which is, well, let's run the code and see. 625. So let's just make sure, 25 times 25, that's 625, so we did it right. So again, this could be quite confusing, but when we do iterators, we'll be using a lot of blocks, and we'll be passing the block to a method, and in the method is going to have different yield statements to execute the block, and we can pass a parameter to the block, and the value that gets returned from the block can also be used in the methods. So it's both way. I can pass variable to the method can pass a parameter to the block, and the block can this block can also pass value back to this yield statement. Okay? Alright, I hope that makes sense. And I'll put some links to some other articles where you can read. There are a lot of different explanations on how to use blocks. But again, just play around with this and see if you can understand what's going on. Alright, thank you.